That's what my CFO said in front of the entire boardroom before cutting my position, smirking like he'd just saved the company from its own backbone. The laughter that followed was polite, uneasy, the kind reserved for men who believe charisma hides corruption. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just closed my laptop, nodded once, and walked out, knowing his signature had already handed me every piece of leverage I'd ever need. Before I continue, tell me, have you ever seen arrogance backfire this fast? The CFO leaned back in his chair, the kind of posture that screams victory before the fight even starts. Mary, you've been a valuable part of this company, but your obsession with compliance is strangling progress, Victor Lang announced, loud enough for the entire boardroom to hear. My name hung in the air like an accusation. I felt 20 pairs of eyes shift toward me, some pitying, most relieved it wasn't them. The screen behind him still showed the quarterly figures I'd spent weeks reconciling, the same ones he'd revised without review. He smiled that practiced, camera-ready grin. Effective immediately, I'm streamlining operations. You'll no longer be needed on the executive compliance team. There it was, termination dressed as innovation. A few department heads stared at their notebooks, pretending to write. My throat burned, but I said nothing. I'd learned long ago that silence unsettles bullies more than protest. Victor adjusted his cufflinks, pretending to care. No hard feelings, Mary. You're talented, just not strategic. The room offered a shallow chuckle, and the CEO nodded like a man watching a car wreck he couldn't stop. I closed my laptop slowly, stood, and met Victor's eyes. He expected tears, an argument, maybe a plea. Instead, I gave him a smile, a small, quiet thing that carried more weight than words. Good luck with your audit next week, I said. His grin faltered just slightly, because deep down, some part of him already sensed it. He'd just fired the only person who could save him. The week before that meeting, my inbox had been a graveyard of ignored warnings. I'd flagged missing invoices, unexplained vendor adjustments, and one line item labeled consulting retainer that matched the CFO's brother-in-law's company. Every message went unanswered. Victor liked to call me the brakes, as if preventing fraud was an inconvenience. When the defense contract compliance system went live last quarter, I'd been the one to design its oversight logic, a framework meant to detect billing anomalies before they became indictable offenses. It wasn't glamorous, but it was precise. The clause buried inside that framework, Section 7A, was my quiet masterpiece, a safeguard required by federal law that temporarily transferred audit control to the operations division if financial discrepancies exceeded a certain threshold. Victor had skimmed that agreement, called it bureaucratic fluff, and signed it himself. I didn't need revenge. He'd already weaponized his own ignorance. 2 nights after my firing, I sat alone in my apartment, reading through my old system documentation like a diary of foresight. Each line of code, each compliance note, each legal footnote was a thread that connected back to me. Victor believed data could be bent to willpower. I believed numbers had memory. And somewhere between his fabricated forecasts and my archived data sets lay a ticking mechanism waiting for activation. I logged into the internal audit portal using my still active credentials. My termination hadn't even been processed yet, a predictable oversight. The system greeted me with a flashing alert. Threshold variance exceeded, pending automatic authority transfer. I stared at those words, feeling something shift inside me. This wasn't vengeance, it was inevitability. He'd cooked the books one too many times, and now the system, the one he dismissed as red tape, had recognized it. My cursor hovered over a single confirmation box labeled Initiate Compliance Review Protocol. I didn't press it. I didn't have to. The audit engine would complete its own verification within 48 hours. Once it did, federal auditors would receive an automated notification that the system's control had shifted to the operational lead on record, me. I shut down my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled. Victor thought firing me had erased a problem. In truth, he'd severed the only wire holding his fabricated empire together. I'd built the system to protect the company, but by Friday, it was going to protect something else. Accountability. When you work in operations long enough, you learn that people like Victor rely on charisma to blur facts. But I'd learned how to make facts unblurred, traceable, undeniable. Every spreadsheet he touched had a digital fingerprint. Every budget amendment he approved left a metadata trail. And every temporary adjustment was logged with timestamps he didn't know existed. I'd never planned to use them against him. They were simply part of my discipline, an instinct to keep things clean. Still, I'd noticed patterns that didn't align with truth. Duplicate payments to the same vendors, inflated expense reports coded under strategic partnerships, unverified consulting fees. It all smelled like arrogance pretending to be innovation. After he fired me, I spent the next 48 hours combing through my private backups. Not to sabotage, just to understand the scale of what he'd done. There it was, 6 months of falsified cost offsets tied to an inactive government contract. I saved everything, PDFs, transaction logs, even Slack exports of his instructions to junior analysts, messages dripping with casual recklessness. Roundup, no one reads the fine print. I packaged each piece of evidence into encrypted folders and uploaded them into the compliance cloud that mirrored our internal servers. It was routine procedure to preserve data for continuity, but I knew what the files contained, receipts that told a story of deliberate manipulation. The deeper I dug, the more obvious the pattern became. Victor hadn't just been creative with accounting, he'd been siphoning projected earnings into shell vendors disguised as legitimate subcontractors. The board didn't know because his charm carried him through every presentation. They heard optimization and applauded. I heard fraud and built a firewall around the truth. By Thursday, the system pinged me. Automatic audit trigger confirmed. My heart didn't race. It steadied. I wasn't doing anything illegal. I was following procedure, the very one he had authorized. The compliance portal began pulling logs from financial databases, cross-referencing every purchase order against vendor tax IDs. I could practically hear the hum of gears turning miles above me in the digital ether. Victor was probably still celebrating his victory, blissfully unaware that the very system he mocked for being too cautious had already compiled his downfall into a single compressed file. I added one last piece, a note summarizing the anomalies, signed with my full name and time-stamped. Then I closed the laptop, unplugged it, and sat in the quiet. Somewhere, algorithms were calculating the gap between arrogance and accountability. In the morning, the federal auditors would see everything, and there'd be no plausible deniability left for him. Victor thought firing me had ended my relevance. He didn't realize my fingerprints were built into the system's DNA. I wasn't gone. I was the audit's ghost, silent, precise, and about to become very real. By Friday morning, the first tremor hit. Accounting reported that several vendor payments had failed without explanation. The Treasury dashboard froze mid-update, displaying a gray error bar that read, "Authorization validation pending." Victor stormed down the hall, phone in hand, barking orders to IT. I watched from my cubicle, unseen, just another discarded employee cleaning out her files. "Get me access now," he snapped at the systems analyst, a kid barely out of college who looked ready to quit on the spot. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The system was already shifting. The audit framework I'd built months ago had completed its variance check, identified discrepancies exceeding the legal tolerance, and automatically invoked Section 7A. From that moment on, all financial authority temporarily transferred to the operational compliance lead. Me. The machine had done what I designed it to do. Strip human interference the second risk crossed a federal threshold. Victor's digital fingerprints were everywhere, triggering every alarm at once. At 9:45 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was an automated system message. Emergency audit protocol engaged. Authority. Reassigned to Caldwell, M. No one else received that message yet. The system staggered notifications by clearance level. I stared at the screen, the words pulsing softly like a heartbeat. For a long time, I simply breathed, steady, deliberate, the way you do before the first drop on a roller coaster. Victor was in full meltdown mode by then, accusing IT of sabotage, demanding manual overrides, shouting for someone to unfreeze his damn accounts. But the system didn't respond to shouting, it responded to documentation, and mine was flawless. By noon, his access was revoked across 3 databases, his credentials flagged pending compliance review. The irony was divine. He'd signed off on that language himself. I walked past the finance department unnoticed, just another mid-level manager collecting personal items. The conference room was chaos. Executives huddled over laptops, whispering, pretending to stay calm. Victor's voice thundered through the corridor. "If anyone knows how to fix this, now would be a good time." His assistant muttered something about contacting the vendor's support line. I stepped into the doorway, calm as still water. "You might want to check your email," I said softly. His head snapped toward me, disbelief flickering behind irritation. "You don't work here anymore." "Apparently the system disagrees," I replied, holding up my phone with the message glowing bright. "Authority reassigned to Caldwell, M." He frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Section 7A, I said. Compliance authority transferred during detected anomalies. You signed it last quarter." The color drained from his face. Around us, conversations faltered. Someone muttered, "Wait, is that real?" Victor opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a notification pinged across the big screen behind him. An automated message from the Federal Oversight Portal. "Compliance control reassigned, pending audit confirmation." The silence that followed was suffocating. Everyone knew what that meant. The system had declared a federal review. Every account, every transaction, every decision now fell under external investigation. Victor swallowed hard, trying to recover his composure. "It's a glitch," he said weakly, his voice cracking. "Just a systems error." But the room could already feel the shift, the gravity changing hands. I didn't argue or explain. I just nodded slightly and turned to leave. The door closed behind me as his phone started ringing again and again, each call another piece of the empire unraveling. The claws had awakened, my work was done. The rest was mathematics. By Monday morning, the company was bleeding from every direction. Vendors were calling non-stop, demanding to know why their payments had bounced. The payroll team discovered half the employee checks were flagged under audit hold. IT tried to reroute transactions through backup servers, but the I0Ys system rejected every attempt. It only recognized credentials authorized under Section 7A. Victor spent the weekend trying to override the lockouts, only to trigger additional security barriers. By sunrise, federal auditors had been automatically copied on every alert. They arrived unannounced, 3 of them, suited, calm, carrying clipboards and badge cases that silenced the office faster than any CEO could. "We're here for a compliance verification," one said, scanning the room with detached professionalism. Victor stammered something about a software bug, but the lead auditor raised a hand. "Mr. Lang, the logs indicate irregularities in billing data across multiple contracts. We'll need your full cooperation." He forced a smile, the same one that had fooled investors for years. "Of course, just a misunderstanding." I sat quietly at my desk, pretending to finish my exit paperwork. My phone buzzed again. A new system alert. Primary authority confirmed Caldwell, M. My heart didn't race. It settled into a rhythm steady and inevitable. The auditors began combing through reports, tracing every expense code, every fake vendor shell, every hidden adjustment. One of them approached me, calm and polite. "Ms. Caldwell, you're listed as the operations lead for this system's compliance framework, correct?" I nodded once. "Can you walk us through how the variance alerts are generated?" I stood, aware of Victor's eyes burning into the side of my face. "Of course," I said. My voice was steady, detached, the tone of someone who's been preparing for this conversation for months. I explained how the audit software cross-referenced vendor IDs against federal registries, how any mismatch triggered automatic account suspensions until manual verification by a certified compliance officer. "And Mr. Lang approved this?" the auditor asked. Personally, I replied, he called it routine paperwork. The auditor's pen scratched slowly across his notepad. Noted. Within hours, the truth began surfacing like debris after a shipwreck. Expense sheets showed thousands of dollars routed to non-existent suppliers. A subcontractor listed under Strategic Advisory Partners was traced back to a condo address belonging to Victor's cousin. His innovation fund was really a slush account, built from misallocated bonuses. The board gathered in emergency session. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I could see faces pale with shock. Victor paced, gesturing wildly, claiming he'd been sabotaged. I kept working at my desk, forwarding files as the auditors requested them. One by one, the dominoes fell. Finance suspended all executive access. The legal department initiated a compliance hold. The auditors demanded copies of Victor's personal communications with procurement. By noon, HR had been asked to provide his employment file. The walls were closing in, and everyone knew it. Yet Victor still tried to fight the inevitable. He burst out of the conference room, red-faced, slamming his palm against my desk. "What did you do?" he hissed. "Nothing outside policy," I said calmly. "The system did its job." "You think you can embarrass me like this?" His voice trembled now, less fury, more fear. "You don't understand who you're dealing with." I met his glare with quiet finality. "I understand exactly who I'm dealing with. That's why I built protections." He froze, realizing what I meant. The room fell silent except for the soft tapping of an auditor's pen against the table. "Mr. Lang," one of them called, "we're going to need to speak with you privately." He turned away from me and followed them into the small conference room. The door clicked shut, muffling the sound of his voice as it rose and fell, desperation drowning authority. Minutes later, the lead auditor emerged. "Miss Caldwell, would you mind joining us?" I walked in, every step measured. Victor sat slumped, eyes hollow, the performative confidence gone. The auditor turned to me. "For record purposes, you are the acting compliance authority as of this morning. We'll need your authorization to finalize the lockout sequence." I nodded. "Do it." With a single keystroke, the system executed its final protocol: permanent account suspension, financial review escalation, and executive disqualification. Victor's screen went black. His access, his titles, his illusions, all gone. He stared at me, stunned. "You planned this," he whispered. I shook my head slowly. "No, you signed this." By Tuesday, the board had summoned everyone to an emergency meeting. The walls of the executive conference room gleamed with polished walnut, but the tension inside was metallic and sharp. Victor sat at the head of the table, his tie crooked, eyes sunken from lack of sleep. The air felt too cold, like the building itself was waiting for judgment. He started talking before anyone else could, voice strained but still clinging to authority. "This was a systems failure," he declared. "The audit tools overstepped their parameters. I'm in control of the recovery process." His words sounded rehearsed, brittle. The chairman, a stoic man known for silence, simply raised a hand. "Mr. Lang, the auditors have reported gross mismanagement and unauthorized fund transfers. Do you deny authorizing those payments?" Victor hesitated, then tried to pivot. "They were strategic reallocations to streamline cash flow." Mary misunderstood the broader intent. My name hung in the air like smoke. I sat 2 seats away, calm, steady, watching him twist the narrative one last time. The lead auditor, a woman named Hensley, opened a folder with clinical precision. "Mr. Lang, these transfers match accounts under your personal approval chain. Here are your signatures." She slid the documents across the table. Victor's hands shook as he flipped. "The pages." "This is misinterpreted context," he sputtered. Hensley didn't blink. "Then please explain why your electronic signature timestamp matches the exact moment those accounts were created." The room went silent again. I could feel every heartbeat, every breath. The chairman leaned forward. "Mr. Lang, your access was terminated yesterday under federal directive. Ms. Caldwell is currently listed as acting compliance officer. Is that correct?" Hensley nodded once. All eyes turned to me. I reached into my folder, slid a single laminated badge across the table, the same one that had been mailed to me that morning. Federal emblem, silver edge, my name printed cleanly. Mary Caldwell, Acting Compliance Director, per Section 7A Authority. Victor gave a weak laugh, brittle and hollow. You're joking, she doesn't represent the board. She's been fired. The chairman looked at me, not him. Ms. Caldwell, can you confirm your authority under the compliance clause? I met his gaze. Yes, sir. Clause 7A mandates temporary operational control to the compliance head when financial irregularities exceed federal tolerance thresholds. Mr. Lang signed that clause himself. The board members exchanged glances. Hensley turned the clause around so Victor could see it highlighted in yellow. His signature sat neatly beneath the paragraph he'd never read. This is absurd, he whispered. It can't be binding. The chairman's voice was quiet but final. It is binding and enforceable. Victor's composure cracked like glass. You can't let her do this. She's setting me up. No, Victor, I said softly. You set yourself up. I just built the safety net. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time, the woman he'd dismissed as a nuisance now holding the power he thought was his birthright. The chairman gathered the papers, signed 2 lines, and looked at him. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending investigation. Security will escort you from the premises. Ms. Caldwell, please assume compliance leadership and coordinate with the auditors. My pen didn't tremble as I signed the acknowledgement. Victor stood there paralyzed, unable to speak. When security arrived, he muttered something about misunderstandings and vendettas, but no one listened. As they let him out, the room remained still. I gathered my folder, nodded to the chairman, and said quietly, "We'll begin the system restoration this afternoon." He nodded once. The door closed behind Victor, and for the first time in months, the room felt breathable again. The man who built his empire on false numbers was gone. The woman he underestimated was now the one holding the ledger. The office felt different after that day, like someone had finally opened the windows and let real air in. The frantic energy that used to hum through every hallway had gone quiet, replaced by something steadier, cleaner. People spoke in lower tones. The junior analysts, the same ones Victor used to bully in meetings, now walked past my office with relieved half-smiles, as if realizing the storm had finally passed. My badge still felt strange, clipped to my jacket. Acting Compliance Director, temporary but solid, a title built on proof, not promises. For 2 weeks, the federal auditors camped out in a side conference room, reviewing every inch of the financials. They asked questions, cross-checked signatures, traced every line item. Each time, my answers were calm, precise, and verifiable. The systems I'd designed held up perfectly. Not one integrity failure, not one missing log. The company would survive, leaner but honest. On the final day of the audit, the lead auditor stopped by my office. "You know," she said, setting down her pen, "if more companies had people like you in charge, we'd be out of work." I smiled. "That's the idea." She laughed, shook my hand, and left. 2 hours later, the board chairman called me upstairs. He didn't offer speeches or grand gestures, just a single folder and a nod. Inside, the new appointment letter, Vice President of Compliance and Operations, effective immediately, permanent. I stared at the signature line for a long time, thinking about every late night I'd spent defending systems no one appreciated, every meeting where my caution was mocked as fear. I signed without hesitation. Justice didn't always roar, sometimes it simply balanced the books. A week later, the new team gathered for our first strategy meeting. I looked around the table, finance, legal, procurement, all people who'd quietly held the place together during Victor's chaos. "No buzzwords," I said. "No illusions of brilliance, just truth. Numbers don't lie, and we don't either." They nodded, and the meeting began. When I finally returned to my own office, a small box waited on my desk, no note attached. Inside was a coffee mug, navy blue printed in white block letters. "Trust the audit." I laughed quietly, setting it beside my monitor. It wasn't triumph I felt, but alignment. as if the world had finally tilted back into place. Weeks later, I heard Victor had taken a compliance advisory role at a small logistics firm in another state. No headlines, no lawsuit, just quiet consequence. That felt right. Revenge wasn't the point. Accountability was. Late one evening, I stood by the window overlooking the city, lights glittering below like a circuit board coming back online. I thought about what I'd tell anyone who'd been silenced by arrogance or overlooked for doing the right thing. Patience is power, documentation is armor, and integrity, real stubborn integrity, is the kind of revenge that doesn't burn. It rebuilds. I used to think the loudest person in the room was the most powerful. That's what people like Victor count on, noise to drown out accountability. But over the years, I learned that quiet consistency outlasts charisma every time. When everything fell apart, it wasn't my voice that saved me. It was my notes, my timestamps, my patience. Real strength doesn't announce itself. It waits. I didn't plan revenge. I practiced responsibility. I documented the small things others ignored, the missing invoices, the mismatched dates, the harmless adjustments that didn't add up. And when the storm hit, those records spoke louder than any argument could. They told the truth with proof. Sometimes the difference between sinking and surviving isn't brilliance, it's discipline. I've met so many people who think silence means weakness, but silence, when used right, is focus. It's the sound of someone building something solid while others chase applause. I walked out of that boardroom with my dignity intact because I'd built my own foundation before anyone thought to take it away. So if you've ever felt invisible at work, remember this: being overlooked can be an advantage. No one guards against the person they underestimate. Keep your receipts, keep your calm, and when the moment comes, let the truth reveal itself in your work. How to get started today. Keep a private record of your contributions, emails, project files, anything showing your accuracy and effort. When someone dismisses your warning, note the date and outcome calmly. Build habits that make honesty your default system. Let time expose arrogance, don't rush justice. Protect your integrity like it's your pension, because it is. Have you ever been underestimated at work and proved them wrong later? Tell me what changed for you.